Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to tune into my presentation. My name is Stephen Guertler, he, him, elle, and they, them also works, and I will be talking to you today about inflectional suffix standardization in the Ulithian language, and how that works with the verbs borrowed from English due to increased cultural and linguistic influence, particularly by American English. I'll be giving a little background about myself as well as the history of Ulithi, where Ulithian is spoken, and some examples of this innovation of incorporating English verbs into the language. A little bit about me. I am a former Peace Corps volunteer. I served in Ulithi Atoll, Yap State, Federated States of Micronesia. I was a teacher at Federai Community School for 2 years. Federai is an island of about 100 people, very small, very intimate population. Got to know everyone really well. I also participated in the One People, One Reef storytelling project, in which I helped record, transcribe, and translate elders telling stories in their native language, having to do with ecological resource management, particularly including traditional wisdom. Through that work, I was able to join the NAMA program, even though Ulithian is not an indigenous American language. A little bit about my positionality. I am a non-native Ulithian speaker, having learned the language while I served in the Peace Corps. I did teach English as part of the Yap State FSM national curricula, but through this I noticed how much English language influence there is on Ulithian. Some of my future goals to this end are to go back to Ulithi and work with the community on setting language maintenance goals, assess what the need is there for that kind of thing, and then make whatever we create accessible to Ulithians no longer living in Ulithi. For example, the children of Ulithians who grow up speaking more English than their native language, who are in the US and maybe don't have as much contact with their homeland and their traditions. A little bit about Ulithian. Ulithian is called Yalul Fuliach in the language, which translates to the voice of our island. It is recognized as one of the official languages of FSM, used in schools all throughout Yap State, from Ulithi Atoll and Face all the way to Sadawal Island, which you'll see in the next slide with the map. It is traditionally an oral language without a written system, currently employing the Roman alphabet in its orthography. This is a fairly recent development, as the US only really started influencing Ulithi Atoll and the Federated States of Micronesia after World War II. Before that, you saw Portuguese and Spanish having first contact in the 1500s, and then the Germans in the 1800s, and then the Japanese from the early 1900s to the 1940s. Here's a map of the Federated States of Micronesia. You see Ulithi Atoll circled in red in the top left, and then going southeast from there down to Sadawal Island, which is on the border of Chuk State. Ulithian is spoken all throughout, although it does change and there is variation as you go out. The only exception being Yap Islands here, the island of Yap, which has a different language spoken there, although there are Ulithians living and working there. You see where Ulithi is and the Federated States of Micronesia in relation to Guam and the Marshall Islands, so to give you an idea of where it is. Zooming in on Ulithi Atoll itself, where I was on Federai Island in the south there. You see a red spot. That's where I lived. There's an airstrip on Falalep that was installed during World War II. On Azor, you see docks that used to be ramps for tanks to roll up onto the island. And Mogmog in the top center is the traditional seat of power in Ulithi, and also had soldiers' barracks at one point. A lot of the trees were cut down to make room for US soldiers to set up camp there. Currently in its second iteration of the Compact of Free Association between the US and Federated States of Micronesia, the nation as a whole, and consequently the Ulithian language, has become more intertwined with the West and with the English language in particular. We see English being taught throughout the FSM as a required course in the state and national curricula, as I mentioned, and influence having started during World War II. So, on to the innovation of this inflectional suffix igli being attached to the root of a verb, and it's an English verb specifically that it works with. And so my informant Ginger had this to say on the topic of the prevalence of English in the Ulithian language. She said, "We have adopted most Western words and combined them to ours. Now we hardly use our own native words." So I thought this was very poignant. In discussion and through observation, the most frequent occurrence, and I would say the only occurrence that this happens, is in Ulithian verb formation where the root is a borrowed English word. We see this suffix igli taking place in every context, from casual conversation between men and women of all ages to more formal settings such as community meetings and even in traditional storytelling, as the example below will show. We call it a remix because that is what I've heard native speakers call it when I lived in Ulithi, and I thought it fitting. So we see here in this first example, which is an excerpt from the origin story of Ulithi Atoll, where the protagonist, the one who sort of created Ulithi, changes into a bird at a certain point in the story. And instead of using the Ulithian word for change, the storyteller decided to use change igli instead. So it would translate to, and then she changed into a Micronesian starling. So change igli. Okay, a little side-by-side for you with an igli verb and then a Ulithian verb that predates the igli innovation, or is its own verb in its own right. We have teach igli on the left and hachengi, to love, on the right. I sort of color-coded it by person so that you can see the similarities between these verbs. A big part is that both end in I, but the rule would still carry through verbs ending in other vowels as well, just with that vowel change. But you would see I and ach and stuff like that instead of a and u. So very similar, very expected, very regular, showing that igli has been sort of accepted and embraced as a regular part of the language. A couple more examples that I have just heard and reproduced here. Bumal sa call iglir irel VHF, so call them on the radio essentially, and then send iglugumem seu tutul pras irel wael, so send us exclusive a bag of rice with the plane. So it works with every inflection. I have separated the verb from igli just because it's easier for someone not familiar with the language to read. So what's going on here? We see that igli is a recent innovation used for English loanwords and more specifically for verbs, and that the suffix igli has already been embraced in the grammar of the language. And then, so how did I do it? I elicited data looking for non-borrowed verbs or a non-borrowed verb that uses the igli suffix, just to see if it had already occurred naturally in the language before, or if igli was a new construction. From the 4 subjects I talked to, varying ages and genders, they were not able to find an exact one that fit the mold exactly. They did find yagli, which means to be ready for or prepare on behalf of someone, and so we'll see that in the following examples, where yagli functions as an intransitive verb and is inflected thusly. Examples of yagli, I did similar ones with similar words in there, so you could see the changes. We will cook some rice so that it is ready for them. So yaglir is set off by the conjunction bo, so that, and then goes from there. And yaglir is inflected for third person plural, for them, right? And then this question formation is formed similarly as statements. And And so Yagilie for me is inflected for first person singular. Some final closing thoughts here. Just the fact that the 4 native speakers could not think of a true native Ulithian exception reinforces the argument for Igli coming about to accommodate new words, especially verbs, and then over time becoming a method for remixing English with Ulithian, even if there is a functioning Ulithian word, as we saw with change Igli. And so in conclusion, we see strong evidence suggesting that Igli is only used for English loanwords, especially verbs. We can make a case for it coming about by convenience of pronunciation. Fronted vowels, and the farthest back you get really is the velar G. And a lot of these sounds occur very naturally and commonly in the language. So it's not a far stretch to say that it just came about because it's convenient. And while there is other borrowing going on in the language from Spanish, German, and Japanese, we see it in the form of nouns, not verbs. And so this new inflectional morphology with Igli is specifically restricted to English verbs because of the increased influence on the language and culture. If you do want to learn more about what's going on with Ulithi at the moment, you can start by going to onepeopleonereefstorytellingproject.org to learn about storytelling, culture, and ecological resource management being done in the atoll. You can always contact me for more information as well. My email is at the front of this presentation. Thank you all very much